Hello friends. Welcome to Stories by Tochi. We bring you interesting folk tales. Please don't forget to hit the like button, share, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for doing so. Now, let's get into the story.
The early morning mist clung to the trees, rolling in from the river like a silent ghost. The village was waking, the scent of burning firewood mixing with the cool breeze. Birds chirped in the distance, their songs interrupted by the occasional cry of a restless goat. In the grand mansion of Chief Okafor, the household was already alive with movement. Servants carried water from the well, their feet stirring up the red dust that covered the compound. The clang of metal pots echoed from the kitchen, where the cook prepared breakfast for the master. Among the workers was Emeka, his hands calloused from years of labor, his heart full of quiet determination. He had come to work for the chief 3 years ago, a boy with nothing but a strong will to survive. Now he was trusted by many, except one person. Obena, the chief's only son, stood on the veranda, watching Emeka with cold, narrowed eyes. His lips curled in disgust. He had always despised the servant boy who worked too hard, spoke too little, and somehow earned his father's approval. The air between them was thick with unspoken hatred, a silent war waiting for its first battle. That night, the house was still, except for the distant hoot of an owl. The lanterns flickered against the clay walls, casting long shadows. Obena moved silently through the hallway, his bare feet pressing against the cool earth floor. His father's bedroom door stood slightly open, the wooden chest at the foot of the bed glowing dimly under the lamp's weak light. His pulse pounded as he stepped inside. He had done this before, stolen from his father, lied about it, and walked away without consequence. This time, however, he wanted more than just money. He wanted Emeka gone. He crouched before the chest, lifting the heavy lid with careful hands. The scent of old leather and paper filled his nose. Inside, stacks of crisp Naira notes lay in neat bundles. He took one, just enough to cause panic, and tucked it beneath his shirt. His fingers trembled, not from fear, but excitement. He had already chosen the perfect scapegoat. Slipping out of the room, he crept down the corridor toward the servants' quarters. The wooden doors groaned softly as he entered Emeka's small space. The room smelled of soap and sweat. A single wooden stool and a neatly folded blanket glowed the only furniture. Obena crouched by the bed, sliding the stolen money beneath it. His lips curled into a wicked smile. By morning, the loyal servant would be nothing more than a disgraced thief. The sun had barely risen when the mansion erupted in chaos. Chief Okafor's furious voice rang through the house, shaking the very walls. "My money is gone," he roared, his face twisted in rage. Servants huddled together in fear as his heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway. "Who among you dares to steal from me?" His piercing gaze swept across the trembling workers. Silence fell like a thick fog. Then Obena stepped forward, his face a mask of sorrow. "Father," he said, his voice carefully measured, "I saw Emeka leaving your room last night." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Emeka's head snapped up, his heart slamming against his ribs. "That's a lie," he choked out, his voice raw with disbelief. The chief's eyes darkened. "Search his room," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. The guards moved swiftly, their hands digging beneath Emeka's bed. A heartbeat later, they pulled out the stolen money. A cold hush fell over the room. Emeka staggered backward, his vision swimming. "No," he whispered, but the evidence lay before him, undeniable and damning. The chief's nostrils flared. "You have betrayed me," he said, his voice like a hammer striking stone. "You will be punished." Emeka barely felt the guards seize him. He barely felt the ground beneath his feet as they dragged him outside. His mind was drowning in the weight of a truth no one would believe. Above him, Obena stood tall, a smirk hidden beneath his feigned sorrow. The sun rose higher, casting long, dark shadows. Emeka knew. His nightmare had only just begun. The air outside was thick with the midday heat, pressing down like a heavy hand. The mansion's grand compound, usually a place of ordered work and hushed voices, now thrummed with tension. Villagers gathered by the tall iron gates, drawn by the shouts from within. A few servants stood at a distance, their faces shadowed with unease. I was among them, my hands clenched tightly as the guards dragged Emeka across the dirt path. His feet scraped against the ground, kicking up red dust that clung to the sweat on his skin. His face, streaked with disbelief, was pale beneath the sun's unforgiving glare. Obinna stood near the mansion's entrance, arms crossed, his expression carefully composed. Only I could see the flicker of satisfaction in his eyes, the cruel pleasure he tried to hide. Chief Okafor stood rigid, his furious storm barely contained. "You are no longer welcome here," he spat. His voice carried through the compound, each word like a knife carving into Emeka's fate. 20 lashes, then leave and never return. The silence that followed was suffocating. The guards moved with practiced efficiency, binding Emeka's wrists to the wooden post in the center of the courtyard. The flogging post, a thing of discipline, of justice, now stood as a symbol of betrayal. My stomach twisted as one of the guards uncoiled the leather whip from his belt. Emeka's breath came in short gasps. I could see his shoulders tense, his fingers curling into fists as he braced for the first strike. The whip sliced through the air with a sharp crack before landing on his back. His body jerked, but he did not cry out. Dust swirled around his feet, the only movement in the stillness. Again, the whip fell, and again, until dark stains of blood blossomed across his torn shirt. The villagers murmured among themselves, shifting uneasily. A few turned away, unable to watch, but no one stepped forward. No one defended him. Even I, though my heart burned with the injustice, could not move. To interfere would mean punishment, exile, perhaps worse. So I stood, a coward in the face of cruelty, and watched as Emeka bore his suffering in silence. When the final lash struck, the guards released him. He slumped to the ground, his body trembling from pain and exhaustion. The chief did not spare him another glance. He merely turned on his heel, retreating back into the house. One by one, the servants followed, their eyes cast downward. The villagers dispersed, whispering among themselves. Soon, only Emeka remained, his blood mixing with the dust beneath him. He pushed himself up, his breaths ragged, his face set in a grim mask of determination. He did not plead. He did not beg for mercy. Slowly, painfully, he rose to his feet, and then, without a word, he turned and walked away from the only home he had ever known. His steps were slow, each one weighted with agony. But even as his figure disappeared down the winding village road, I could feel it. The fire in his soul had not been extinguished. If anything, it burned brighter. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. The road stretched long and empty before him, winding through the thick bush like a scar upon the earth. The afternoon sun hung heavy in the sky, its golden light turning the dust beneath Emeka's feet into a dull, rust-colored haze. His body ached with every step, each lash still fresh upon his back, but he did not stop. He could not. To stop was to accept defeat, and he would not give Obinna that satisfaction. Blood clung to his torn shirt, mixing with sweat, but he barely felt it. His mind was drowning in the echoes of the chief's words, the sting of betrayal heavier than any wound upon his skin. The village had turned its back on him. The people he had worked beside, laughed with, shared meals with, they had all watched in silence as he was cast out like a thief. His hands clenched at his sides. He was no thief, and one day they would all know the truth. As night began to creep across the land, the world around him shifted. The familiar sounds of the village, chatter, laughter, The distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer faded into the unknown whispers of the forest. Crickets chirped in rhythmic pulses, blending with the distant hoot of an owl. The trees swayed in the evening breeze, their dark silhouettes stretching like twisted fingers against the sky. The further he walked, the more isolated he became. No path, no sign of life, just endless trees and shadows that moved when he wasn't looking. Hunger clawed at his stomach, but there was nothing to eat. His throat burned with thirst, his vision swam from exhaustion, yet he pressed on. The forest did not welcome the weak. It did not care for suffering, and neither did the thing that lurked just beyond his sight. A rustling sound stopped him in his tracks. His breath hitched. The hairs on the back of his neck rose. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the darkness. A low growl rumbled from the trees, deep and guttural, the sound of something ancient and hungry. Then movement. A shadow shifted, creeping between the trunks, its outline barely visible in the dim moonlight. Fear tightened around Emeka's throat, cold and merciless. He took a slow step backward, his legs shaking beneath him. The growl came again, closer this time. Whatever it was watching him, stalking him. His heart pounded against his ribs. He had nothing, no weapon, no strength left to fight, only the will to survive. Summoning the last of his energy, he turned and ran. The trees blurred around him, branches clawing at his skin. The growl erupted into a snarl, followed by the heavy thud of something chasing after him. The night had swallowed him whole, and in its depths, something hunted him. The forest closed in around him, its towering trees stretching high into the sky like silent witnesses to his suffering. The darkness was thick, swallowing the last hints of moonlight that managed to break through the dense canopy. The sound of his own ragged breathing filled his ears, mixing with the distant howls of unseen creatures. The pain in his back burned like fire, but fear kept his legs moving. Whatever lurked behind him had not given up the chase. The sound of snapping twigs and shifting leaves echoed through the trees, a constant reminder that he was not alone. His heart pounded, his vision blurred, but he could not stop. Not here. Not now. The forest floor was uneven, filled with roots that twisted like snakes, waiting to trip him. His foot caught on one, and he tumbled forward, crashing hard against the ground. Pain shot through his body, but before he could move, he heard it, heavy breathing. Close. Too close. Slowly, he turned his head, his body frozen with terror. A pair of glowing yellow eyes stared back at him from the darkness. The creature was massive, its shadow stretching across the earth like a thing from nightmares. Its breath was hot, its growl low and menacing. Emeka's blood turned to ice. This was not just any wild animal. It was something else, something unnatural. Then, just as the beast took a step forward, a sound split the night, a sharp whistle, followed by the rustling of leaves. The creature halted, its ears twitching. Another whistle, a command. The yellow eyes blinked once, then twice, before vanishing into the shadows as if they had never been there. Emeka lay still, his chest heaving, his mind racing. Someone or something had called it away. But who? And why? He pushed himself up, his body screaming in protest. He was no longer just running from his past. Now, he was running from the unknown. And deep in the heart of the forest, the unknown was far worse than any man. The silence that followed was heavier than the night itself. Emeka remained crouched on the damp earth, his heart hammering so loudly he feared it would betray his presence. His hands trembled, his skin cold despite the humid air. The glowing yellow eyes were gone, swallowed by the forest, but something far more unsettling lingered, a presence unseen but undeniable. Whoever had called the creature away was still out there, watching. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to move. His legs felt like lead, his back screamed with every motion, but he had no choice. He had to get away before whatever spared him changed its mind. A voice sliced through the darkness, low and smooth like flowing water. "You run well for a wounded man." Emeka froze. The voice came from somewhere ahead, from the shadows between the trees. He could see nothing, only hear the faint rustling of leaves as the unseen figure shifted. His throat went dry. Every instinct told him to flee, but his body refused to move. "Who are you?" he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. A moment of silence passed before the voice replied, "Someone who saved your life. Do not waste it." The words were calm, but they carried a warning. A rustle, a step, then nothing. The presence was gone, disappearing as suddenly as it had appeared. Emeka remained frozen for a long moment, his breath shallow. The air felt colder now, the night heavier. He did not know who had spoken or why they had helped him, but he did not want to wait and find out. Summoning what little strength remained in his battered body, he pushed himself forward, deeper into the unknown. Each step was agony, but he welcomed the pain. It reminded him he was still alive. He had been cast out, abandoned, hunted. But something told him his journey was far from over. The road ahead was still long, still dark. And somewhere along the way, the true nightmare was waiting to begin. The night stretched on, endless and suffocating. Emeka trudged forward, his body begging for rest, but the fear of stopping was greater than the exhaustion weighing him down. The stranger's voice still echoed in his mind. Who had they been, and why had they saved him? His thoughts swirled, tangled like the roots beneath his feet, but no answer came. The forest remained eerily silent, the only sounds his own labored breathing and the occasional rustling of unseen creatures. He needed water. He needed shelter. But most of all, he needed to get far away from whatever had been hunting him. The trees thinned as he stumbled into a small clearing. Moonlight poured down in pale streams, illuminating the land ahead. A narrow footpath twisted through the grass, leading toward a cluster of old wooden huts, barely visible in the distance. His heart leaped at the sight. Civilization, a chance for help. But as he moved closer, a strange unease crawled up his spine. The village was too quiet. No voices, no smoke curling from rooftops, no flickering lanterns in the windows. It was as if the place had been swallowed by time, abandoned to the wild. His steps slowed. Something wasn't right. Then a noise, a soft creak, like the shifting of old wood. Emeka turned sharply, his pulse racing. The door of one hut stood slightly ajar, swaying gently in the wind. His instinct screamed at him to run, but his thirst and desperation overpowered his fear. He took a cautious step forward, then another. As he reached for the door, the floorboards beneath his feet groaned. In that instant, the air shifted, a whisper of movement behind him, a shadow in the corner of his vision. Before he could react, rough hands grabbed him, yanking him backward. A cloth was pressed over his mouth, the bitter scent of something strong filling his nostrils. He thrashed, his body jerking against the grip, but the darkness swallowed him before he could scream. A pounding ache filled Emeka's skull as he drifted between wakefulness and oblivion. His limbs felt heavy, his thoughts sluggish, as if he were trapped in a thick fog. The scent of damp earth and smoke filled his nose. Slowly, his senses sharpened. His wrists were bound behind him, the rough fibers of a rope cutting into his skin. His back throbbed with pain, the lashes from earlier reopening with every movement. Panic surged through him as he forced his eyes open. A dim fire flickered in the center of a small, cramped hut. Shadows danced along the mud walls, their twisted forms shifting like spirits. He was not alone. 3 figures stood near the fire, their faces partially hidden in the dim light. 2 were men, their bodies lean and hardened, their eyes sharp with suspicion. The third was a woman, older, her expression unreadable. She stepped forward, her dark eyes steadying him like a hunter watching its prey. "You woke faster than I expected," she murmured, her voice low and smooth. She crouched beside him, her fingers tilting his chin up. "You are strong." Emeka jerked away, his breath shallow. "Who are you?" he rasped. The woman's lips curled into a small smile, but there was no warmth in it. "That is not the question you should be asking," she said, rising to her feet. "The real question is, why are you here?" The two men exchanged glances, their hands resting on the weapons at their waists. A sick feeling twisted in Emeka's gut. He had walked into something far worse than he had imagined. The woman turned toward the fire, her gaze distant. "The boy who betrayed you, does he know you are still alive?" The words sent a cold shiver down his spine. How did they know about Obinna? Who were these people? Emeka swallowed hard, his heartbeat thundering in his chest. He had escaped one nightmare only to wake in another. And this time, he wasn't sure if he would make it out alive. The fire crackled, filling the hut with the scent of burning wood. Emeka's breathing was shallow, his mind racing through every possible escape, but the ropes around his wrists held tight. The woman studied him, her dark eyes unreadable. The two men stood motionless, their hands still resting on their weapons. Outside, the forest whispered, the night pressing in like a living thing. The weight of danger hung in the air. The woman finally spoke. "You are not an ordinary boy," she said, her voice slow and deliberate. "Few survive what you have endured, and fewer still escape the beast that hunts these woods." Emeka tensed. "What do you want from me?" he asked, forcing his voice to remain steady. The woman smirked. "A boy falsely accused. A boy betrayed. A boy hunted," she mused. "And yet you live. That means something." She crouched beside him again, her fingers tracing the scars on his arm. "We know who you are, Emeka. We know who cast you out." His chest tightened. "Then you know I have nothing," he said bitterly. "No home. No family. No future." The woman tilted her head. "That depends." She leaned in closer. "Would you like revenge?" The question sent a chill down his spine. He should have said no. He should have ignored the way her words stirred something dark and buried deep within him. But he did not. Instead, he swallowed hard and whispered, "What do you want in return?" The woman's smile widened, slow and knowing. "Loyalty," she said simply. "We do not offer kindness for free." The fire flickered between them, its light dancing in her eyes. The two men remained silent, watching. Emeka felt the weight of his past pressing against him, the betrayal, the pain, the fear. He had spent his life being powerless. But now, he had a choice. His heartbeat thundered as he met the woman's gaze. This was a path he could not turn back from. But perhaps it was the only way forward. The fire cast long, shifting shadows across the walls, the air thick with unspoken promises. Emeka's pulse pounded in his ears as the woman's words settled over him like a net tightening around a trapped fish. Revenge! The word clung to him, wrapping around his thoughts, filling the hollow space where hope had once lived. He thought of Obinna's smug face, of the chief's disgust, of the lashes that had ripped through his flesh. He thought of the betrayal, the pain, the hunger, the helplessness. His fingers twitched against the rough fibers of the rope binding him. For the first time since his exile, power dangled before him like a ripe fruit waiting to be plucked. The woman reached into the folds of her wrapper and pulled out a small, curved blade. Its edge gleamed wickedly in the firelight. "You must decide now," she said, her voice soft, coaxing. "To return to the world as a ghost, forgotten and broken, or to rise as something stronger." She turned the blade in her palm before offering it to him. "Spill your own blood, and we will give you the means to take what was stolen from you." The two men remained silent, their expressions unreadable. But Emeka felt their anticipation, the weight of their stares. This was no mere offer. It was a test. His throat tightened. He had never killed before, never held a weapon with the intent to harm. But had mercy ever saved him? Had goodness protected him from Obina's lies? He thought of the cold ground where he had bled alone, the unseen beast that had stalked him through the night, the strangers who had bound him like an animal. There was no place for weakness in this world. Slowly, he curled his fingers around the blade's hilt. It was heavier than he expected, its metal biting against his skin. He took a deep breath, then, with steady hands, pressed the tip against his palm and dragged it across. Pain flared, but he did not flinch. Blood welled up, thick and warm, dripping onto the dirt floor. The woman's eyes gleamed with approval. She nodded once, satisfied, then turned to the men. "Untie him." The ropes fell away, and for the first time in days, Emeka's wrists were free. He curled his fingers, feeling the sting of the cut, the weight of his decision settling in his bones. He was no longer the boy who had been cast out. He was something else now, something with purpose, something dangerous. The woman smiled. "Welcome home." The night pressed in like a living thing, thick with the scent of earth and burning wood. Emeka sat in silence, his wounded palm resting on his knee, the blood drying against his skin. The woman, who had yet to give her name, watched him with the patience of a spider, waiting for its web to tremble. The two men remained close by, their eyes sharp, their bodies coiled like predators, ready to strike if he made the wrong move. But he wouldn't run. Not now. He had chosen this path. The woman finally spoke. "You have given your blood. Now you must prove you are worthy." She rose and walked toward the doorway, her figure casting a long shadow against the mud walls. "Come?" Emeka hesitated only for a moment before pushing himself up, his body stiff and aching but fueled by something far stronger than pain. He followed her into the night. The clearing was eerily silent, the moon a sliver in the sky, barely offering its light. A wooden post stood in the center, and tied to it was a man, his face swollen, his clothes torn, his breathing ragged. "This is a thief," the woman said, her voice even, emotionless. "He stole from us, just as someone stole from you." She turned to Emeka, pressing the curved blade back into his palm. "You want revenge, boy? You want justice? Show me you are ready to take it." The weight of the blade burned in his grasp. The man groaned weakly, lifting his head. His eyes, dark, sunken, met Emeka's, filled with the kind of terror he himself had once felt. His fingers tightened around the handle. The world seemed to close in around him. He thought of Obina, of Chief Okafor, of the pain and humiliation he had suffered. This was what it meant to be strong. This was the cost of power. And yet, his stomach twisted. Was this truly the path he wanted? His breath came slow and heavy. The woman's gaze bored into him, waiting, measuring. The men shifted, restless. The night held its breath. This moment would decide everything. If he took the blade to this man, he would never return to who he was before. Emeka's grip tightened. His pulse thundered in his ears. The choice was his. Hope you enjoyed this interesting story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. See you again in my next story.